1936, Kentucky. Man kills entire family because of creepy ritual. On a stifling August night in Ashwick, Kentucky, 1936, a scream tore through the stillness of the Appalachian Hills. The scream came from the Lowell house, then fell silent. A neighbor, Mr. Jedediah, sitting on his porch, heard it. He waited, but there was only the sound of crickets and the thick fog that blanketed the red dirt road. Driven by a gnawing unease, he hurried to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Davies and his deputy, a young man named Cole, were dispatched. Neither of them suspected that night that they were about to walk into a scene that would haunt this small town for decades, a place where logic and sanity no longer applied. The trail leading to the Lowell house looked ordinary. Towering pines, the faint trickle of a dry creek. But that night, the log cabin stood isolated, next to the massive shadow of an abandoned blacksmith's forge. It wasn't its age or its desolate appearance that sent a shiver down their spines. It was the front door, ajar, letting the light from an oil lamp inside flicker, wavering like a dying breath. Inside, there were no signs of a break-in. No broken furniture, no screams, just a suffocating stillness. The smell was the first alarm, the smell of charcoal smoke, acrid, mixed with the scent of rust and something else, cloying and sweet. In the main room, the officers found a dark stain soaked into the wooden floor. No footprints, just a long drag mark, as if something heavy had been pulled. Hannah Lowell was found slumped on the kitchen floor, a dagger plunged deep into her chest. Her eyes were wide open, empty, with no signs of a struggle. Daniel Lowell, 11 years old, was found in his bedroom, curled up on the floor, his neck brutally snapped. The boy's eyes were still open, fixed on a dark corner of the room, as if staring at an invisible horror. On the table, an unfinished dinner, 2 plates, 1 untouched, a glass of spilled milk, but no sign of the father. No sign of the youngest child until they saw the cellar door. It had been bolted from the inside. What Sheriff Davies and his deputy saw behind that cellar door was never recorded in the official report. But according to Cole, who left the police force shortly after, Edward Lowell was found sitting on the cold dirt floor, his hands and shirt soaked in his wife's blood. Beside him was his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, unharmed, clutching a rag doll, her sobs racking her body, but making no sound. The man was smiling, not a mad smile, but one of serenity, of completion. When Davies asked what happened, Edward said only one thing: they weren't pure. Only Lily was chosen. Then, he held out his wrists to be cuffed, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The little girl couldn't stop shaking. Lily Lowell, 7 years old, sat wrapped in an old woolen blanket, her bare feet dangling over the worn wooden floor of the sheriff's office. Every time Cole offered her a glass of water or gently asked a question, she turned away, her eyes vacant. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't blink. She had blood on her nightgown, not her own, and not a single drop on her hands. Back at the house, the scene was being sealed off. The forensics team from the next county began their grim work. The bodies of Hannah and Daniel were carefully removed, but the real puzzle, the one that haunted Davies, was the layout of the cellar. No other weapon was found besides the dagger, no signs of a struggle, just an old wooden chair placed in the middle of the floor, and behind it, carved deep into the damp stone wall, was a symbol, 3 interlocking triangles like a perpetually trapped flame. Edward Lowell had written something beneath it in his own blood. The fire demands purity. The unclean must be extinguished. It was signed with the family name, Lowell. Sheriff Davies had served in Ashwick for over 20 years. He had handled poaching cases, family feuds, and even children lost in the woods. But nothing had prepared him for the blank, serene expression on Edward's face. "Why did you do it, Edward?" he asked softly, his voice tinged with the sadness of a man who had known this family for a long time. Edward didn't hesitate. "They were tainted," he said. "The fire was stirred by impure thoughts. I tried to extinguish them. Only Lily was chosen." "Because she's your daughter?" Edward slowly looked up, his eyes dry and unreadable. "Because she listened." That word stuck with Davies. Listen to what? Back at the sheriff's office, Cole found something unexpected. Dozens of small notebooks, tied together with twine and hidden in a tin box under the Lowell's kitchen floor. Each was marked with a year. Inside were Edward's fragmented notes. Prayers, Hannah, The hearth, the whispers, Daniel's sleep, smoke, Lily's silence. Most of the pages were smeared with ink, perhaps from the dampness, but a few passages were still legible. A notebook from 1935 began with shaky handwriting, then Edward's script. I hear it again in the walls, in the burning wood. I think it's using them to call me. I can't let it have Lily. Davies assumed Edward had been driven mad by poverty and isolation, but when Lily was later asked about the voice, she only whispered that it was in the chimney. And this is when the town of Ashwick, Kentucky, began to change. Before the tragedy, no one paid much mind to the Lowells. After the tragedy, no one dared speak their name. Neighbors started locking their doors earlier. The school took down the picture Daniel had drawn of the mountains. The general store where Hannah used to buy flour quietly removed her name from the credit ledger, as if the family had never existed. But one thing remained: Lily Lowell, alive, silent, and carrying a story no one wanted to hear. It took nearly a year for Lily Lowell to truly speak about what happened. In 1937, at the age of 8, Lily lived with Mrs. Martha Reed, a distant relative. She was described as an introverted, obedient, and strangely quiet child. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She hardly made eye contact. But one night, she used a piece of charcoal to draw something on the wooden floor of her room. The same symbol from the cellar, 3 interlocking triangles, like a trapped flame. When Martha asked what it was, Lily just said, "I saw it in the smoke. That's what my daddy was listening to." That's when Mrs. Martha knew she had to contact Eleanor Price. Eleanor Price was a social worker specializing in neglected children in Lexington. She had worked with children orphaned by illness, families broken by poverty, and children who had survived family tragedies. But Lily, though only 8, was unlike anyone she had ever met. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She spoke slowly, mechanically, as if everything was a sad fairy tale being retold. And the first time she described what happened, she said it like this: "We weren't supposed to go into the cellar, but I woke up when I heard Mom scream. So I went out to the living room, but the lamp was out and the floor was sticky." "Sticky?" Eleanor asked gently. Lily nodded. Like honey. She didn't correct the girl. She said her father had been awake for many nights, that he had stopped going into the woods to chop wood, that he would just stare at the fireplace even when it wasn't lit. He said there was something in the chimney, that Mom had heard it, that her brother Daniel had been marked. Lily told Eleanor that her father had stuffed rags into all the cracks in the windows and sealed the fireplace with a wooden plank. He said it used smoke to move. Who did? Lily didn't look at her. She whispered, "The one with no face." Eleanor's colleagues in Lexington dismissed this testimony. Trauma projection. A child's mind inventing monsters to cope with real-life horror. But there were details Lily provided that had never been made public. The position of the bodies, the color of Hannah's apron, the location of the axe Edward usually used, which had never been found. She also mentioned something else. Her mother had tried to take the children away 2 nights before it happened, but Edward had blocked the door and told them they were now sealed by the smoke. Lily said she remembered her mother crying by the well, talking to herself, but no one in town had seen her leave the house for over a week. The last thing Lily remembered was the sound from the fireplace. "It wasn't normal," she said. "It didn't sound like burning wood. It sounded like whispering." Eleanor asked her what it said. Lily didn't answer. She just got up, walked to the sheriff's office window, and began to draw on the dusty pane with her finger. She drew the symbol again. "That's the door," she said. "It lets it in." And in that moment, Eleanor stopped thinking this was just a girl with delusions, because she had seen that symbol before, not in a book about cults, not in Lily's file, but in another, unrelated case, one she hadn't thought about in years. Next, we uncover what Eleanor remembered and how another case might be connected. Eleanor Price was not a superstitious person. She had graduated from the social work program at the University of Kentucky, had worked in impoverished slums, and had studied psychological trauma in abused children. Her job was to mend broken souls, not to believe in curses. But when Lily Lowell drew that symbol, something shifted. A cold clarity ran down her spine. She had seen it before, exactly once, and it had haunted her for the past 5 years. In 1931, she was a trainee social worker at an orphanage in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. It was not a place people remembered fondly. The building had been converted from an old factory, and most of the children there carried irreparable scars. One of them was a boy named Samuel Pike. Samuel had been sent to the orphanage at the age of 12 after being accused of starting a fire that burned down his family's farm, killing his parents and 2 younger sisters. But what made his case stand out wasn't just the crime. It was his behavior afterward. He never showed remorse. He never screamed. He just muttered the same phrase over and over: "The fire demands." Eleanor had been assigned to observe Samuel. At first, it seemed like a routine task. Then, one afternoon, she noticed something on the dusty ground of the playground, a symbol drawn with a stick, identical to the one Lily had drawn. Eleanor had asked the orphanage director about it. He told her it was nonsense, said that some traumatized children often drew strange shapes. But a week later, Samuel was found dead in his room. No suicide note, no signs of a struggle. The boy had died of smoke inhalation in a locked room with no signs of a fire. The doctors attributed it to a sudden respiratory failure, but Eleanor always wondered why his lungs were filled with soot if nothing had burned. Now, 5 years later, Lily Lowell had drawn the exact same symbol, and when asked where she saw it, she didn't hesitate. Behind the fireplace. It was already there. Lily had never known Samuel. She wasn't even born when the boy died. But the connection, the deaths, the fire, the whispers, all pointed to something older, something no longer confined to psychological records or village gossip. Eleanor retrieved her personal notes from that 1931 case. She still kept them in an old leather briefcase. Page after page of Samuel's fragmented statements. Most were incoherent, but one line stood out, scribbled over and over. "The door opens where smoke gathers. It only needs one to listen." She circled that phrase. What if Edward Lowell had become that listener? What if this wasn't just madness? What if he hadn't imagined something in the chimney, but had invited it in? Eleanor sent a detailed report to the welfare office in Lexington, linking the 2 cases. It was ignored in less than a week. The response came back in bureaucratic terms. No clear connection. Recommend focusing on the child's resettlement. But someone must have read it, because that same week, her boarding house room was searched. Nothing was taken except the file on Samuel Pike's case. If Eleanor Price hadn't returned to the abandoned Lowell family home, none of what followed would have come to light. She wasn't authorized to do so. In fact, Sheriff Davies had asked her not to go back, especially not alone. The house had been sealed, slated to be left to collapse on its own. But something about Lily's drawing, that symbol, wouldn't let her go. She needed to see for herself. It was dusk when she arrived. The log cabin stood like a gaunt skeleton next to the black shadow of the forge, silent under the blood-red sunset. The fire of tragedy had not taken everything, but what remained was worse. The smell of old charcoal smoke, the scent of mildew, and inside, the lingering smell of dried blood and something sweeter, human. Eleanor entered through the back door. The kitchen was dark, but the hallway was still intact. She walked past the traces of a life that had been extinguished and into the living room, where Lily claimed to have seen the symbol. The fireplace was cold, its mouth soot-black, but behind the rusted iron fire screen, something was wrong. Eleanor pulled the screen aside and pulled out a loose brick. It wasn't part of the original structure of the fireplace. She pried it out. Beneath it was a narrow, dark hollow, deep inside the wall. The smell that hit her nose wasn't the smell of ash. It was something ancient, dry, metallic, like iron ore and burned bone. Using a flashlight, she looked inside. On the bricks lining the inside of the chimney, every few inches, was the same carved symbol. Dozens of them, identical. Eleanor couldn't explain it, but in that moment, she felt it. The air around her grew denser, her chest tightened. Somewhere deep in the chimney, she heard it, a low rumbling, a repetitive melody. Just like Samuel Pike, just like Lily. She backed away and hurriedly put the brick back in place. Back at the sheriff's office, still trembling, she began to research the historical records of Ashwick and the symbols associated with that shape. She filtered out the common ghost stories, instead focusing on local history, land records, settlers' notes, and county archives from the 19th century. Then she found it. In 1894, near the Lowell property, a small settlement of miners had been abandoned after a mysterious fire. No bodies were found, but several old mine shafts were discovered beneath the ruins, much deeper than what was recorded on the maps. This settlement had been shunned since 1888 due to pagan rituals involving fire and earth. Among the remaining artifacts found, there was a notebook, all describing the songs of the earth, repetitive melodies. On the last page of the notebook, a symbol was drawn with charcoal, identical. Eleanor Price stared at the record, her heart pounding. This wasn't madness. This was an inheritance. Whatever had controlled Edward Lowell had also controlled others before him, and now it was talking to his daughter. Next, we return to Lily and find out what she saw on the night her father changed. Lily hadn't spoken in days, not since she drew on the floor, not since she recounted seeing her father break her brother's neck while humming a tune no one recognized. But she wasn't mute. Not exactly. She still whispered, just not to people. Eleanor returned to Mrs. Martha's house to visit her the morning after discovering the secret wall cavity. She noticed something new, a stone fireplace in the corner of the living room, the kind of old fireplace that hadn't been used in years. Lily was sitting beside it, her knees drawn up, her lips barely moving. She stepped closer. "Lily, what are you saying?" The girl didn't flinch, didn't blink, just kept whispering softly directly into the cold mouth of the fireplace. A repetitive melody, like a chant. The same melody. She leaned in closer. That's when the girl stopped and finally looked at her and said, "He's still singing, but not from here. From below." "Below where, Lily?" Lily didn't answer. She slowly squeezed her small fingers into the crack between the cracked bricks of the fireplace and pointed into the darkness within. There, just for a moment, she heard it. A scratching sound, then another, then something that sounded like a muffled rumbling from beneath the house. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She searched for every land record she could find about the area around the Lowell house. What she found startled her. This land originally belonged to a mining company established in 1880. Beneath the ground was a network of old tunnels and mine shafts, including unused ventilation shafts, collapsed passages, and areas marked as unstable that had been sealed for nearly 50 years. And buried in one of the old geological maps, barely visible, was something else. A circular chamber beneath the forge area, marked only with the words, "Fire Pit," sealed 1894. She laid the map down and looked at it in disbelief, and no one had ever mentioned this in the town's stories. No one in Ashwick talked about it, yet it had been there all along. She returned to Mrs. Martha's house the next morning to check the fireplace again. This time, the wooden plank sealing the fireplace mouth had been pried off. Lily was nowhere to be found. She raised the alarm. Sheriff Davies and Cole searched the entire house, the garden, and the dry creek. Nothing until Davies found the cellar door of the Lowell house ajar. They followed the familiar path, down the rotten wooden stairs lit only by a flashlight. On the far wall was an iron door, recently opened. Below it were stone steps leading into darkness. Lily was sitting on the bottom step, calm, silent, and barefoot. When they approached, she looked up and said something that stopped everyone cold. "He stopped singing when I got close because he smelled Mom." Lily didn't resist when they carried her up the stairs, but she didn't say anything either. She just kept glancing behind her, toward the iron door at the end of the tunnel, toward the darkness. They took her back to Mrs. Martha's house and a doctor gave her a sedative, but Eleanor stayed behind. She needed to know what was down there. She returned to the tunnel, armed only with a flashlight and an iron bar. The air was colder, dry, smelling of coal and something else she couldn't identify, like burnt metal. The tunnel ended in a circular room. The walls were stone. The floor was packed earth, but in the center, an old fire pit had been cleared of ash. It looked recent. There were new scratch marks, and inside the pit was a circle of bricks leading straight down. This was it, the fire pit, and someone had been in it. She aimed her flashlight down. The pit was about 15 feet deep. At the bottom, there was no water, only a thick layer of black ash. Dozens of metal fragments, old forging tools, animal bones, and symbols carved into the walls, visible even through the grime. But it wasn't just objects. There was something else in the ash, something bigger. She squinted. It was a human figure, sitting cross-legged, back straight, pale. She stumbled back. It was the body of Edward Lowell or something that looked like him, but it wasn't burned. His skin was pale, but taut and smooth, with no burns, no tears, eyes closed, as if meditating. a peaceful expression, except the corner of his mouth was slightly turned up in a smile, as if he had just heard something satisfying. Eleanor ran out of the tunnel and reported everything. The police were called. The recovery took hours, and when the body was pulled up, something else became clear. There were no wounds on his body, no blood, no signs of violence. The man was completely intact. So whose body had they found in the kitchen that night, and who had they buried? Lily was awake again that evening, silently drawing in her notebook. Eleanor sat beside her. The girl pushed the notebook toward her, a drawing of the pit, and beside it, not just her father's body, but a second man, not a drawing of a dead man. A man standing in the pit, observing, smiling. Eleanor asked, "Who is that, Lily?" The girl looked down and whispered, "He was always down there. Daddy just helped him out for a while." She stared at the picture again. The second man's face was not entirely human, long and narrow, with no eyes, and where the mouth should have been, it was just a shadow. Next, we returned to the house where it all began, but nothing is where it should be. The investigation team expected decay, ash, bloodstains, something to make sense of the carnage, but when they re-entered the Lowell house to begin a full sweep, they found almost nothing. The living room, where Daniel's body was found, had been cleaned. No bloodstains on the floor, no drag marks, no signs of a struggle, just an old wooden chair placed too perfectly in the middle of the room, facing the cold fireplace. Even stranger, the wooden walls, not just clean, but scrubbed, so much so that the old varnish had been worn away to reveal the raw wood in some places. An investigator pressed his finger against a faint smear next to the fireplace and noticed something. The dark layer on the wall wasn't a stain. It was a thick layer of pine resin, used historically to mask odors and bloodstains. Who had cleaned this place? Hannah before she died, or had Edward been preparing? In the shed next to the house, they found a set of forging tools, old but polished, and arranged in a neat row on a canvas cloth. An iron clamp still had a long strand of hair stuck in its hinge. It didn't match anyone in the family. The investigations took weeks, but when the results came back, they shocked everyone. The strand of hair belonged to a young woman who had gone missing 5 years earlier, a girl who had disappeared from a farm in the next valley. No one had ever connected her case to the Lowells. Until now, the town had long whispered that Edward Lowell, like his father and grandfather, was a quiet man who knew a lot about the old remedies and customs of the mountains. Now it seemed he hadn't forgotten a thing. The cellar was worse. Beneath the flagstones of the floor, hidden in a wall cavity, they found wooden boxes sealed with beeswax. Each box was filled with charcoal. Inside, personal items, small things preserved too well for how long they must have been there. A baby tooth, a fingernail, a ribbon. In one box, a doll's glass eye, still intact, lying amidst the black charcoal like a pearl in the darkness. Marked, dated, no names, just numbers. Back at Mrs. Martha's house, Lily was drawing again. Eleanor asked her gently, "Do you know who those things belong to?" Lily nodded. "They were the lost ones. The lost ones. Daddy said they weren't pure. The fire said so. Daddy was keeping the pure ones." "What do you mean, keeping them?" Lily looked up, her voice flat. "Daddy said they would be needed when the forge wakes up again." Eleanor froze. "Wakes up?" Lily pointed to the floor. "The walls sometimes go to sleep, but they'll open again soon." That night, one of the investigators, a man named Peters, locked himself in his office. He was found hours later huddled under his desk, muttering a single sentence after having carved it into his desktop with his pocket knife. "He's not gone. He just got in." Sheriff Davies had lived his whole life in these mountains, but nothing unsettled him like the smell under the Lowell house. It wasn't the smell of decay. It was older, drier than damp, a smell he couldn't identify, like wet coal and molten iron, metallic and acrid. He followed it into the cellar, past the empty shelves, past the loose flagstone where the boxes had been hidden. Then he saw it, an iron trapdoor set beneath a wooden plank, almost too perfect, almost staged. He hesitated. Behind him, Cole and the others began to mutter, "Do you all smell that? Christ, it's even in my hair." When they pried open the trapdoor, it revealed a set of jagged stone steps. Thick, black roots had pushed through the earthen walls, coiling like veins. The air grew colder, drier. They descended in silence, each footstep echoing with a sharp, dry crunch on the stone. Below them, a single corridor carved into the Kentucky clay. No electricity, no ventilation, just earthen walls, hand-dug, reinforced with wooden beams and carvings. Along the walls, dozens, perhaps hundreds of names were carved with a sharp object, perhaps flint or old bones. Some were years, some had initials, a few were just whispers, but one message repeated every few feet, always the same 6 words. He feeds the fire feeds him. The end of the tunnel opened into a circular room, and there, half buried in the dirt floor, was a large stone forge, black, basalt, too smooth, too perfect. But it rumbled, not metaphorically, but audibly. Deputy Cole reached out. Just a finger touched the stone surface, then pulled back instantly. It wasn't cold or hot, it was alive. "Sir," one of the volunteers called to Davies. They had found something behind the forge, another wooden box. Inside, a lock of hair, a baby tooth, and a piece of tanned leather folded so many times that it nearly crumbled when opened. On it, a symbol was carved with charcoal, 3 interlocking triangles. Except the central triangle wasn't a triangle. It was a mouth, teeth, and all. Meanwhile, at Mrs. Martha's house, Lily had gone silent, stopped drawing, stopped talking. Eleanor noticed something in the girl's posture. She had begun to imitate someone or something. She sat with her back straight, her eyes forward. She refused to look at the fireplace or the dark corners of the room. When asked why, she only whispered, "He sees through the ash." "Who?" Daddy said. "The forge has an eye. That's how it finds who's next." Back in the tunnel, one of the young volunteers stood too close to the forge. He stepped forward just once and collapsed. Heart attack, seizure, no one could tell, but his lips were moving, and when they listened closely, he was muttering a string of nonsensical words, sounding like an ancient language. The town of Ashwick had long forgotten its origins. Most believed it was founded in the late 1800s by miners and churchgoers seeking a new life. But Sheriff Davies now knew better. The forge was not just an old relic or a child's ghost story. It was part of something older and darker. When the black stone forge was discovered beneath the Lowell house, Davies ordered the county archives opened. Files that hadn't been touched in decades, locked drawers with crumbling ledgers, newspaper clippings printed in faded ink on brittle paper, and beneath it all, a church register from 1871. The first few pages were standard entries for births, deaths, and weddings, but then something strange. Occasionally the word baptism was crossed out, replaced with the word offering. There were names beside it, children aged 7 to 12, all marked with the same phrase, "Given to the fire, witnessed by 4. The ink was smeared, some pages were torn, but the name of the officiant remained clear. Blacksmith Amos Lowell, Edward Lowell's great-grandfather. The Lowell family had been part of the town's lifeblood from the beginning, but no one ever talked about them. They owned land, provided tools for the whole town, even helped build the school, always quietly, always just enough to earn respect. But this wasn't faith, this was ritual, and it went far beyond the Lowells. In a dusty old tin box, Davies found a daguerreotype photo dated 1875. A group of 4 men standing outside the forge, all dressed in dark clothing. No smiles. Every child standing next to them had a blank expression. At the front, Amos Lowell, one hand on a book, the other resting on what looked like a stone anvil. The same forge now beneath the Lowell house, the same black surface, the same impossible texture. It hadn't been moved. The forge had been built around it. Back at Mrs. Martha's house, Lily began to speak again, but her drawings had changed. No more simple triangles. Now she drew flames, dozens of them, inside the fireplace, beneath the floorboards, in the earth under the oak trees. "He doesn't sleep," Lily whispered to Eleanor. "He just waits until the forge gets hungry again." Eleanor asked who he was. Lily answered with a name no one had taught her, Amos. That night, Eleanor reviewed old county records related to the town. There had been others. Children who saw strange things, who heard voices from the ground, children who disappeared after playing near the old forge. But one report chilled her. A boy in 1912 had spoken a nearly identical phrase. He sees through the ash, and he too had drawn the same symbol, a triangle with a mouth full of teeth, just like Lily. Davies sat alone in his office that night, looking at the old daguerreotype photo again. he noticed something he hadn't before. In the far corner, the shadow of a fourth man, unnamed, not facing the camera, but where his feet stood, the ground looked scorched. The discovery came not from an investigator, but from the forge itself. One of the townspeople, a young man named Finn, had returned alone to the Lowell property just after dawn. He had heard that people were finding antiques there. Inside the crumbling stone walls of the forge, Finn noticed something strange. A foundation stone that felt wrong, not loose, but hollow. He pried it open and found an iron box wrapped in a thick, rotting piece of leather. Inside, a notebook, bound not in leather, but in what looked eerily like tanned human skin. The pages were discolored, cracked at the corners, and the handwriting was meticulous, steady, clinical. He turned to the first page. There, written in neat script, "If this book is opened, the hunger has returned. It feeds through blood, but it sees through the firekeeper." Finn didn't understand, but something told him this was no ordinary notebook. He brought it to Sheriff Davies, who immediately took it to Eleanor. Together, they carefully opened it, one page at a time. It was written by Amos Lowell, and it chronicled over 4 decades of offerings. The language was coded, not overt, but ritualistic. He spoke of the forge beneath the foundation stone, the voice in the chimney, and the importance of purity and silence. The notebook described rituals held every 12 years, always involving 4 members. The others were unnamed, only listed as brothers A through C, but the fourth, always called the Firekeeper. Eleanor began to piece it together. The Firekeeper wasn't an adult, it was a child. Always a child. One who saw, one who remembered, one who survived. And for each round of offerings, one child was spared. Not out of mercy, but to be a witness, a vessel. Lily was not the first, she was the latest. Amos had designed a ritual to continue even after his death, something that could be passed down through bloodlines, through silence, through trauma. And worst of all, the ritual required the Firekeeper to stay at the forge, to keep the fire from erupting. Eleanor looked again at Lily's latest drawing. This one was different. It was a map, not of the house, but beneath it, tunnels, secret rooms, auxiliary forges, and at the center, a black shape circled in red. Beside it, the words, "It's not sleeping." She asked Lily who told her about the map. The girl didn't speak. She just looked toward the fireplace and smiled. Next, we will discover what lies beneath the foundation and why the Lowells were never allowed to move away. The stone foundation of the Lowell Forge had always made strange noises, even when it was no longer in operation. The locals used to blame it on the unstable ground of the Kentucky mountains. But after the notebook was discovered, attention turned downward. Lily's map showed something that no drawing had ever recorded: a trapdoor under the foundation of the main forge. Sheriff Davies and Eleanor, along with 2 volunteers, returned to the forge. The forge had long been cold, but the stone in the center was unmistakable. Unlike the other stones, this one had cracks filled with a shiny black metal. When pried open, it released a smell like damp coal and stale air. They descended with gloves, flashlights, and a rope. The space below was dry, silent, untouched by time, but about 10 feet in, the passage gave way to something deeper, a hollow pit, man-made. There were markings on the walls, symbols carved into the stone similar to those in Lily's drawings, and at the center, laid in a circle of black ash and rust, were 3 skeletons. They were not recent. Davies guessed they had been placed there at least 50, 60 years ago, much earlier than the recent tragedy, and they had all been positioned in the same way. Arms crossed, skulls smashed, jaws wired shut with metal wire. Near them, scraps of old canvas, remnants of work coats, had been preserved in the still dry earth. Beside them, a broken forge hammer with what looked like human teeth embedded in its head. One more thing, there was space for 4. 1 skeleton was missing. The implications were horrifying. The Lowells did not start the ritual. They inherited it, each generation passing it on, cleansing, sacrificing, hiding. Amos had simply refined it, making it more organized, more ritualistic, easier to conceal. He did not invent the evil, he was raised by it. Then came the deeper question: who was the missing skeleton, the one who had been part of the original circle and escaped burial? Was it Amos? Or worse, someone still alive? someone who ensured that the fourth position remained available for the next cycle. As they climbed out of the pit, Davies noticed something else, stuck in the dirt near the fourth empty spot. A wooden doll, clean, preserved, as if it had never decayed. Inside it, rolled up neatly, was a piece of parchment. It read, "He sees through their eyes. He waits until they forget." Lily had also drawn that symbol, only she didn't call it a symbol. She called it the mouth in the fireplace. This question haunted Sheriff Davies, Eleanor, and everyone who read Amos's notebook. Who was the missing fourth skeleton? To find out, Eleanor turned to the oldest surviving records of the land itself. Before the forge was built in 1870 by Amos Lowell, before the settlement, before the clearing, the land had belonged to a group of independent miners, active from 1850 to 1865. There were no official records, no death certificates, and no clear leadership. The people from neighboring towns only knew them as the Deep Diggers. Most people assumed they were gold prospectors or a group of poor miners, but a surviving land deed named 4 founders. All were men, not related by blood, but all had Welsh immigrant surnames. One of them, Thomas Lowell, Amos's grandfather. A report of a mine collapse from 1865 revealed that their original camp had been buried in a landslide. The cause was unclear, but the report noted a chilling sentence carved into a surviving wooden beam. One broke the pact, the rest must feed. Shortly after the collapse, 3 of the 4 men disappeared. No records, no burials. Only Thomas remained, and 5 years later, he bought the land again, this time in his own name, and began building what would become the Lowell Forge. The exact center of the forge sat atop the collapsed mine shaft. Amos's notebook contained pages that looked out of place, written in a much older hand. They were brittle, the ink a faded brown, with phrases like, "The mouth below is never sated, only the firekeeper may walk above. He sees through their eyes, waits until the forge is ready." The handwriting matched samples of Thomas's from the county records. He had kept the pages, perhaps passed down after the collapse, and Edward had read them without fully understanding. This meant it was undeniable. The Lowell tragedy was not a sudden tragedy. They were the continuation of an old pact, passed down from men who believed in feeding something beneath the land, something they called the fire. Only one had tried to walk away. He never reappeared, and every generation since, someone always died, someone was always spared. But why Lily? Why was she the one they left behind? Back in the cellar, Davies laid out the evidence. 3 skeletons in the pit, a 4th space left open, a preserved wooden doll, and the land's history pointing to a ritualistic cycle. Lily's survival was not an accident. It was a choice. Someone had chosen her, just as someone had chosen another Lowell child years ago. The horror was not just in what they did. It was in how long they had been doing it. It was the summer of 1888. Amos Lowell had just turned 19. By then, he was already a tough young man, broad-shouldered, strong-willed, and silent in a way no boy should be. But he was also curious, and that curiosity, his father used to say, would be his ruin. He started digging, not because he suspected anything, but because the forge had begun to smell. Not of coal, but something more acrid, metallic, like heated iron ore and burnt flesh. It started after a heavy rain. Amos was in the coal cellar taking inventory when he heard something behind the stone wall. A scratching, then a knock, then silence. At first, he thought it was a weasel, maybe a fox. But then it spoke, a dry, whispering voice. "I told them not to dig deeper. They didn't listen. You still can." Amos used an iron bar to pry open the wall. Behind the loose stones was an earthen tunnel, not tall enough to stand in, but long enough to disappear into shadow. He crawled for 30 feet. He moved through clay, rocks, and a smell that grew thicker the deeper he went. And then suddenly, a chamber carved by hand, reinforced with wooden beams older than the forge. And there, lying on the ground, was a man. His hair was almost all gone. His skin was wrinkled and clung to his bones. But his eyes, they were the eyes of Thomas, his father. It was Reese, one of the original 4, the one who was said to have run away. He hadn't escaped. He had been buried alive, or perhaps buried himself in the earth beneath the forge. Amos didn't run. He sat with the man for hours. He listened. Reese told him everything about the pact, about the thing beneath the ground, about the price for endless iron ore. We thought it would make us rich. It did, for a time, but we never stopped paying. One by one, it took us until I was the only one left, and now you've built a forge on its mouth. Amos asked him why he stayed. Why not run away? Reese laughed dryly, or tried to. What was left of his lips cracked like charcoal. Because it speaks. Because I hear it in my sleep, and if I leave, it will follow. He held out something to Amos, a small notebook, wrapped in tanned leather, stitched shut with thin metal wire. Amos took it. When you know what's inside, you will understand why you must never stop sacrificing. Years later, that same notebook would be found among Edward Lowell's possessions. Sheriff Davies didn't read it at first, but then Eleanor would. And when she read it, the story would change again. Because what was inside should not exist. Not in 1936, not in 1888, nowhere. That night in 1888, Amos sealed the tunnel behind him. He didn't tell anyone, not even his wife, but he began to prepare. He now knew what the forge was built on. He knew why his business continued to thrive while others failed, and he knew that one day he would have to offer something back. Amos didn't open the notebook for years. He hid it under a loose brick in the fireplace where no one dared to touch. His wife once asked him what he was brooding about. He said, "About the family's debt." She never asked again. But in 1903, years before Edward Lowell was even born, something changed. A child from the next valley, a boy named Elijah Kane, disappeared while herding sheep, the third child in 2 years. No bodies, no suspects, no trace, just a string of old stories, whispers from old miners about a black smoke rising from the ground, children lured by the sound of a hammer, and a name that had begun to circulate again: the Lowell Forge. Amos was a middle-aged man by then, still working in the forge, still quiet, still observing. But now he opened the notebook. Inside were pages recording the offerings, names, dates, and chilling descriptions of how the fire demanded. There were 14 names. Amos read them. He recognized 3 of them. They were not from Ashwick. They were from other counties, places where missing children were also being reported. Amos copied the names and dates onto a piece of paper, said nothing, and just sent it anonymously to the sheriff's office in the next county. That same month, the sheriff of another county, a man named Manning, received the piece of paper. What he read on it would eventually lead him to start a secret investigation into the Lowell family, an investigation that would be buried for decades. But he didn't believe in curses. He believed in patterns. And these names, they were not just victims. They were all connected to families who had once worked in or near the original Lowell mine shaft, the land that was supposed to have been sealed after the 1865 collapse. But a pattern began to emerge. Every 12 years or so, a cluster of disappearances, always children, always near the land where the original 4 made their pact. And someone or something was collecting mementos of them: hair, teeth, scraps of cloth, all stored in these boxes. A few of them were later found, one from a dry creek, one from behind an abandoned warehouse, one hidden inside a wall of the old schoolhouse. But Amos's notebook was the first, and it contained something else. No other notebook had it: a map, drawn with what appeared to be charcoal. It traced the tunnels beneath the forge, extending to the forgotten graves of the first miners. That's when Eleanor realized this wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a system. Old, maintained, fed. She wrote in her notes, "This isn't a curse. It's a ritualistic inheritance. These people didn't believe in demons. They believed in feeding the fire. And now the fire, once again." Amos Lowell left nothing more behind after those notes. But years later, Edward Lowell, in his madness, continued it. A notebook filled with drawings of the tunnels, of the man beneath the earth, and of what was to come. Next, we will explore the notebook, and inside are pages that describe the Black Hammer, a sound that only the Lowell children could hear before they disappeared. Eleanor Price read the notebook alone in the sheriff's office. It was the kind of reading that stains you, not because it was gruesome, though it was, but because it was written like a confession. Edward Lowell's handwriting was shaky, frantic, like someone trying to record a storm raging in his head. Page after page, drawings of tunnels beneath the forge, maps of mine shafts that no longer existed, crude illustrations of stick-figure children with hollow faces walking hand in hand toward a burning forge. But what chilled her the most was not what he drew, it was what he described in just 4 words. The Black Hammer's sound. Edward first heard it when he was 8. He said it came from beneath the fireplace, right after the first rain. It was always low, like a vibration you couldn't locate but felt in your bones. Not a metallic sound, not a voice, something in between. A summons, he wrote. Only children of the line can hear it at first. That's how it chooses. Those who follow never return the same. The Black Hammer's sound is not from the forge. It comes from what sleeps beneath it. Edward claimed his older sister, Abigail, heard it first in 1915. 2 weeks later, she disappeared. The family claimed she ran away to a big city, but Edward said he saw it. Abigail walking barefoot in the night, her mouth moving as if whispering to someone inside the smoke. 3 days later, their father came home with soot on his overalls and told everyone that Abigail had gone to live with relatives in the east. No questions were asked. No one ever saw Abigail again, but in Edward's notebook, he drew what he saw in the warehouse that night. A girl kneeling on the ground, her head tilted and shadows around her, too many legs, none of them human. Eleanor Price knew it was madness on the surface, but when paired with the wooden boxes, the missing children, the forgotten land records, something fit too closely to be ignored. Edward ended one entry with a single sentence. "If you are reading this, it knows you are near." Eleanor put the notebook down and looked out the window. A man in miner's clothes had been standing at the end of the street since she arrived at the office, saying nothing, doing nothing, just waiting. She made a decision that night. She would not submit the notebook as evidence. Not yet. She needed someone else to see it first. A woman who had once tried to investigate the Lowells in 1920, a retired former nurse named Martha Reed, the same woman who left Ashwick after a triangular symbol was drawn in blood on her door. Eleanor was about to find out why. Retired nurse Martha Reed hadn't spoken to anyone about the Lowells since 1920. After 2 of the children she cared for disappeared without a trace. All having played near the forge, she packed her bags, quit her job, and moved to another town 50 miles away. But what no one knew was that she had taken something with her, a locked wooden chest, and inside it, sealed notes, illegally copied medical records, and a photograph of a badly burned child. Eleanor Price found her through an old nursing registry. When she arrived at Martha's small house, the woman looked as if she had been waiting for this moment for decades. "I told them," she whispered, "but they buried the babies and the truth with them." Martha gave Eleanor a folder marked Children of the Fire. Inside were images that had never been filed in any public case. A newborn boy with eyes as black as coal, found alone in the woods near the Lowell property. An anonymous note, "It is pure. Do not bring it back." A medical report describing strange burns on the soles of the child's feet, 3 triangular scars. But the most disturbing file was handwritten. Martha had secretly investigated in 1918. One of the Lowell girls, just 14 years old, had shown up at her clinic, pregnant, barefoot, and nearly mute. She had drawn symbols on Martha's notepad, 3 interlocking triangles, and the same 3 scars appeared on her wrist. Martha described the Lowell family with chilling detail. They don't call their children by name, just by their birth order. Each child is taught a song about the forge to hum. The forge is not just for smithing. They hide something beneath it, something that eats. She had tried to report it to the county authorities 3 times. Each time the file was lost. No explanation, no appeal. A sheriff just told her, "These people don't break the law. They are the law here." Eleanor scanned every page. She couldn't believe how long this had been going on and how many people had looked away. The photo of the burned baby was still on the table, and behind it, tucked inside a medical envelope, was a single lock of hair, fiery red, like molten iron. The label read Specimen 1, Lowell Forge, infant, unaged. Eleanor's hands trembled. This wasn't just an accident. This was breeding, harvesting, and hiding. She looked at Martha. "Why are you helping now?" The woman didn't blink. "Because I still hear it sometimes, that Black Hammer's sound, and last week it came from my fireplace." Dr. Alistair Finch had been the county's only doctor for over 30 years. He had seen cases of black lung, typhoid, even the aftermath of brawls in the mines. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the body of the Lowell child. He was not the first to examine the body, but he was the first to say no. No to a hasty sign-off. No to the cause of death being listed as an accident. No to the subtle threat. And that's when he knew he wouldn't be around for much longer. One of the Lowell children, a boy of about 10, was found near the old forge in 1922. No blood, no obvious trauma. But when Finch opened the boy's chest cavity, what he found were not a child's lungs. Instead, a pair of bag-like structures, jet black, veined, tough as leather, with no alveoli, no bronchioles, covered in something like soot, and it emitted a faint heat, even after the body was cold. He immediately contacted the state health department. They told him to bury the body immediately. Instead, he preserved them in alcohol and locked them in an iron safe in his office. 2 days later, someone broke into his office. Not the safe, not the medicine cabinet, just the files. Specifically, every record related to the Lowells. But they missed something. Inside an old medical textbook, Finch had hidden glass plate photographs, photos of the structures, and a detailed sketch. What the sketch showed still haunts Eleanor Price to this day. The boy's skeletal structure was subtly altered, as if he had been subjected to heavy labor from a young age. His fingers were longer than normal. His chest was abnormally broad, and his teeth, they were worn down as if he had been chewing metal. Eleanor asked Dr. Finch if any of this could be explained medically. He shook his head slowly. No disease explains this, and no child survives long with whatever was allowing them to breathe. He poured them both a glass of tea and added quietly, "I sent a sample to a friend in Lexington. A week later, he sent it back. No note, just a hastily written line on the box. Not human tissue, burn it." Eleanor asked the question she dreaded. "Do you think they were altered?" Dr. Finch did not hesitate. "I think they were bred for a purpose, but I don't think it worked. Not the way they wanted." And then, with a resigned sigh, he handed Eleanor a single 8mm film reel. No label, just the year, 1915, the year Edward Lowell's sister disappeared. He looked at her, his face pale. They recorded what they were doing. I've never watched it, but maybe it's time someone did. Eleanor waited until she got home, locked the door, drew the curtains, and poured a cup of tea. Then, with trembling hands, she loaded the old 8mm film into her father's dusty projector. The white wall flickered, scratches, then a faint hissing sound, and then a cellar. It wasn't the Lowell cellar. This one had stone walls, light from a single overhead lamp, and a camera placed in a fixed position. No time code, just the oppressive silence. 3 children stood in the center of the frame, barefoot, hair matted, wearing tattered work clothes. Their mouths moved, but no sound came through. Just the clicking of the projector, rhythmic, like a countdown timer. Then a man entered, tall, dressed in a blacksmith's clothes, but his face was obscured by shadow. He moved to each child and placed his hand on their forehead. Each time, the child trembled, as if with a high fever, but no one screamed, no one even blinked. Next, another man entered the frame. He wore the black coat of a preacher, but his face was terrifyingly familiar. He pushed in a wheelbarrow. Lying on it was a body, female, perhaps in her 20 seconds, eyes open, unblinking, not breathing. The man in the blacksmith's clothes leaned down and whispered something in the body's ear. Then, the woman in the wheelbarrow opened her mouth and began to... 2 days later, Eleanor returned to the Lowell property alone. No backup, no camera, just a flashlight, gloves, and the same nauseating feeling that had been growing since she watched the film. She didn't tell Sheriff Davies, because if what she found down there was real, he would bury it along with her. The cellar was sealed off by then. A wooden plank nailed across the door, a warning written in charcoal. "Do not enter. Unstable mineshaft." But Eleanor pried it open anyway. The stone steps were cold under her feet as she descended. The air was different now. Not just dry, it was warm, as if breathing. On the far wall, behind the old forge, was a trapdoor, just like on the map, a heavy iron rim, locked with a rusted padlock. Eleanor used the iron bar to pry it open. With a screech like tortured metal, the lock shattered, and what she saw below was a shaft, narrow, lined with old stone with iron rungs leading into the darkness. She climbed down 10 feet, then 20. The air grew hotter, thicker. At the bottom, an earthen tunnel stretched out in both directions, supported by wooden beams, slick with a black, oily substance. She used her flashlight. There were symbols carved into the beams, runes, numbers, and one word repeated over and over: the forge. Further down the passage, the walls changed from stone to organic. Thick, black roots had overtaken everything, thick, vein-like strands, pulsing slightly as if alive, and in the center of the chamber, a mound covered in canvas, child-sized. She approached slowly, her breath catching. The canvas was old, hand-stitched, a name carved in charcoal: Abigail Lowell. But Abigail was supposed to have run away. Or was she? Eleanor pulled back the canvas. The body beneath was small, preserved, but not like a normal corpse. Its skin was ash gray, hard, and too perfect. The eyes were slightly open, glassy, but not dead. And from the back of the skull, black roots had grown out, burrowing into the ground like a tree. The girl wasn't decomposing, she was growing. Eleanor stumbled back, horrified, but before she could run, she heard it. The same hissing sound from the projector, not a sound, more like a frequency vibrating in her teeth. She turned. At the far end of the tunnel, 3 more figures were emerging. Small, pale, rooted, all with their eyes open, all watching her. She ran. Back in the daylight, she vomited beside her car. She wanted to call for help. But how do you report something like that? Yes. Hello, I just found a nursery of children growing beneath a cursed forge. She couldn't. Not yet. But now she knew the truth. And someone had intentionally built the forge. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. Not after what she'd seen under that forge. The word "the forge" haunted her. What kind of person plants a child? And more importantly, who planned it? She returned to her evidence board. In the corner of that board, pinned for weeks and barely noticed, was an old name. Ewan Davies, land surveyor, 1870 to 1895. He was Sheriff Davies's grandfather. Ewan had worked for the mining company, mostly mapping mine shafts and water veins, but in the late 1872, he was privately hired by Amos Lowell to chart geological anomalies beneath the forge. Eleanor found the record in a county archive written in pencil: request for mapping of auxiliary shaft beneath Lowell Forge. Noted unusual root growth. No follow-up requested. Signed, E. Davies. She found Ewan's son, Sheriff Davies's father, an old man on his deathbed in a nursing home. He was almost 90, didn't recognize her or anyone. But when she placed a copy of the map in his lap, his hand began to tremble. Then he said one word. He paid. It took hours of coaxing, but the old man slowly began to speak. Fragments of memory surfaced. He said the tunnels were too perfect to be natural. The roots were not from any tree he knew. They followed the underground water veins. His father believed someone had been feeding the soil. When he reported it to Amos Lowell, he was told to burn the notes. 3 days later, his father was offered a large sum of money. Cash. No more questions. So, he took it and kept silent. But Eleanor pressed harder. Who built the tunnels? The old man looked up, tears in his eyes. Not built, guided. My father said the ground already had it in it. They just helped it remember. She left his room in silence, her mind racing. That meant someone knew the Lowell land was different, had chosen it, and had used it. So, Eleanor returned to her car, flipped through the land reports, cross-referencing every parcel Ewan Davies had surveyed with similar notes. A pattern emerged. 4 properties, each with strange child disappearances, each with a geological anomaly noted, each with a report of a mysterious fire filed decades earlier. The Lowell Forge was just one branch of a much older root system. Back in Ashwick, Eleanor visited the only living person who had once owned land adjacent to the Lowell family, an old hunter named Silas Kane. He opened the door before she knocked. "You finally found the tunnels," he said. Silas Kane was 87, sharp-eyed, and already dressed as if he had been expecting Eleanor. His cabin smelled of pine wood and gunpowder. Old maps were rolled up on the walls. He motioned for her to sit. "I wondered when someone would come asking," he said. "You're about 30 years too late." Silas had inherited the property from his father, land adjacent to the Lowell Forge, and he remembered everything about what lay beneath it. Not just the tunnels, but the rituals. He called them the forgings, said they would happen every 15 years or so. Never the same family twice, but always the same signature. Children go missing. The land dries up. The land becomes quiet. Eleanor asked the obvious. Who was behind it? He said it wasn't who, but what, the land. He said there was something in it, a hunger. He had seen his father find a child's shoe in a hole near the forge. He showed Eleanor a newspaper clipping from 1903, one she had never seen. Boy vanishes near Lowell property. Only shoe found, but no follow-up article, no public search. The county authorities sealed it. Why? Because Silas made a deal. In 1910, a strange man came to his door, didn't give a name, but offered a sum of gold to buy a portion of his land, on the condition that he never ask about what they were digging there. He agreed. The following spring, the land was leveled. No markers, no construction, just a new fence. And for years, it remained quiet until another Lowell took over the forge. Eleanor stared at Silas. You knew children were being taken. I knew worse, he whispered. I knew where they ended up. He led her to his warehouse. Beneath the floorboards was a trapdoor, rusty, sealed. He hadn't opened it in decades, but now he insisted. What she saw below was not a tunnel. It was a burial pit, lined with stone, circular, almost ceremonial, and at the center, a forge hammer was driven into the floor, cracked with baby teeth embedded in its head. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took photos. The deeper she looked, the more she saw what seemed to be child-sized indentations in the dirt, as if something had grown out of them, not into them. She turned to Silas, who stood pale. I never touched it, he said, but someone did, more than once. Before she left, Silas gave her a small box. Inside was a notebook belonging to someone named Sister Elspeth Lowell. The name sent a chill down her spine. The notebook was dated before Amos Lowell was even recorded as the owner of the forge. Next, we opened Sister Elspeth's notebook, and what she wrote inside redefines everything Eleanor thought she knew about the Lowells. The leather cover was cracked, the pages curled with age, but the ink was sharp, as if written yesterday. On the first page, these are the things I must confess, not to God, but to whoever survives us. EL 1868. Eleanor Price turned the pages slowly. The notebook was part confession, part instruction manual. It began years before the Lowell family officially owned the forge, before they even had children, and it was not addressed to a pastor, it was addressed to the fire. Elspeth Lowell was not a nun by any church's standards, but she called herself a servant. She wrote of vows, a cleansing pact, an inheritance from the earth. In one passage, she described her mother giving birth in a mine shaft on a cold winter's night, a birth attended only by the men of the clan, and something she called the faceless blacksmith. Eleanor read that part twice. The faceless blacksmith appeared frequently in the pages, always capitalized, sometimes followed by, "Do not speak his name." He was described as having no face, a presence that watched their family from the smoke, from the fire, from their dreams. She wrote, "We were the last line of the fire keepers. We kept him bound, but we broke the rhythm. We spared the sun." Eleanor froze. Spared the sun. The entries changed after that. Elspeth's tone shifted from devout to frantic. She wrote of visions. She described the ground beginning to whisper again. The forge demands more when we resist. 1 child every 12 years or the ground will swallow 3. It is mercy. Eleanor felt sick. She skipped to the final pages. Dated 1885. The handwriting was shaky, smudged with what looked like ash. I can't hold the youngest back anymore. She hears him too clearly. Last night, she spoke in his voice. If you find this, it means she has opened the way. May the fire forgive us or consume us. No name, no clear ending, but one detail stood out, scrawled in the margin next to the final page, a symbol Eleanor had seen before, 3 interlocking triangles, and just below it, ask Lily where the real Forge Island, Lily Lowell, the only known survivor. The girl Eleanor once believed was too traumatized to speak. Now she wondered, what if Lily isn't mute because of trauma? What if she's waiting? Eleanor returned to the Lowell property just before dusk. She didn't call for backup, didn't take a radio, she didn't want interference. Not this time. The sun sank behind the hills, painting the horizon red. She stood at the threshold of the ruined forge, her heart pounding, Elspeth's notebook in her coat pocket. There was no other mine shaft on record, according to the county records. No blueprint, no mention. But Elspeth's last note was clear. Ask Lily where the real forge island. Lily Lowell was 7 when the tragedy happened. Found huddled in the cellar, silent, covered in blood that wasn't hers. She hadn't spoken a full sentence in almost a year. Not to the doctors, not to the sheriff. But Eleanor remembered something. When she first met the girl, she kept drawing triangles, 3 of them interlocked. She had found that drawing in her case file, the same symbol Elspeth had drawn. Inside the forge, the decay was deeper, the stones covered in moss. The air was damp with ash and memory. She found the iron trapdoor where she had once seen Lily staring, but this time she looked closer. Behind a pile of scrap metal, hidden by a stone that had once been carefully placed, she found it. A crack in the stone. No handle, just 3 carved triangles. The symbol again. She pressed her palm against it. Click, the stone shifted without a sound. Steps led down into complete darkness. Not a mine shaft, but a room colder than the rest of the forge. The stone walls were slick with moisture, and carved on them were dozens of names. Not just Lowell's, but dozens of family names, generations, but some had been violently scratched out. Others were freshly carved. She found her name, Price, her breath catching in her throat. She backed away, but something creaked behind her. A second wooden door, ajar. Beyond it, a small room. No furniture, just ash on the floor, and a wooden doll lying in the center. She crouched down. On the wall above the ash, written in charcoal, "He's awake again." Suddenly a voice behind her. A childlike, fragile voice. "You shouldn't be down here." She turned. Lily Lowell standing there, unafraid. But her eyes, they were not the eyes of a traumatized child. They were aware, and worse, waiting. The girl didn't look at her, just passed her toward the wall. "Did she write about me?" she asked. Eleanor nodded. Lily exhaled. "I was the one they weren't supposed to keep." She stepped toward Eleanor. "What's down here, Lily?" The girl smiled, almost kindly. "Not what? Who?" And then she raised her hand and pointed to the wall again. There, right next to the words, "He's awake again," was something newly carved. "Welcome back, Eleanor." Lily didn't move, neither did Eleanor. The silence between them was oppressive, but not empty. It was watching them. Eleanor's flashlight flickered. She tapped it, still dim. She took a step back toward the chamber door, but Lily spoke again, her voice older than her years. "Did you ever wonder why Elspeth left you the notebook?" Eleanor stopped. "You thought it was random," the girl continued. "You thought she chose you because you were good, honest, different from the others." Her head tilted. "She chose you because you're from here." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She was born in Lexington, but was adopted. She had never known who her biological family was. "You're a Lowell," Lily said quietly. "No," Eleanor whispered. "You were part of the ritual, but your mother ran away before they could finish. Elspeth found you later. She gave you to another family without telling anyone where you came from. She tried to break the cycle." Lily pointed to the wall again. "Your name carved there wasn't a message. It was a summons." In the far corner of the room, the stone wall began to vibrate, almost as if it were breathing. Eleanor slowly turned, the flashlight trembling in her hand. The surface shifted, revealing not stone, but something organic beneath. Black veins, faint movement. There was something inside the wall. "The blacksmith wasn't a man," Lily murmured. "He was a seed, a first flame. The thing behind that wall, that's the forge, the root." Eleanor stared. "You've seen it," she realized. "You remember it?" Lily nodded, her eyes glinting in the darkness. "I was 5 when they put me in front of it. It showed me things. It showed all of us things." She took a slow breath. "And now it wants you." The wall cracked. A black, oily smoke began to seep out from between the stones. The chamber trembled. Far off, a deep roar echoed as if something ancient was shifting underground. Eleanor pulled out her silver crucifix. Lily didn't flinch. "You can't kill it," she said, "but you can make it sleep again. You just need a firekeeper." Her eyes met Eleanor's. "That's why Elspeth brought you back. That's why you were always meant to return." Eleanor's flashlight, long, weak, suddenly hissed. Through the crackling, a whisper. "Don't let it out." It was Elspeth's voice. Eleanor turned. The flashlight burned out completely. She had one choice. She lunged toward Lily, holding her tight. The girl didn't resist. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm ready." Behind them, the room lit up with a dull red glow like embers inside the earth. She hugged Lily, shielding her. Lily collapsed. The wall behind her screamed, then fell silent. Outside, the ground rumbled. The Lowell Forge collapsed inward as if swallowed. Eleanor crawled out just in time, bruised and trembling. From the tree line, she looked back once, where the forge once stood, now just a black pit of earth. But in the air, faint and drifting like ash, a song about a forge, the song Edward had hummed, the song Eleanor remembered from her childhood dreams. That night, she didn't file a report. She didn't report it. She drove straight to her mother's grave. There, she placed the notebook on the ground and said only one word: "Thanks." She never spoke of what happened again. But if you go to the Lowell property now, you will see nothing. Just a clearing, no foundation, no ruins. But sometimes, if you stand in the right place, you will feel warmth beneath your feet, as if a forge was still smoldering deep below.